All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. We'll start with introductions per usual. My name is Russell White. I'm the AmeriCorps Vista member serving here at the Iowa Mentoring Partnership.
Nicole Quaid, also with the Iowa Mentoring Partnership.
And unfortunately, we are not graced by Mary's presence today. She is participating in jury duty, so she'll be gone out of the office until sometime next week, but she's obviously here with us in spirit. Next, we want to go through the rest of you who are joining us today, Nicole, and introduce yourselves. So I'll go ahead and unmute everybody. Just make sure that you have yourselves self-muted, and then whenever you have questions or comments, you can always unmute yourself and join in. So I'll go ahead and unmute everybody. We can start with Amanda McCurley to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Amanda McCurley. I am from the Iowa Department of Public Health AmeriCorps Substance Abuse Prevention Program. And we have mentors serving across the state at different mentoring programs.
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda. It's always great to have you with us. And next with us is Anna.
Hi, I'm Anna from Everybody Wins Iowa. We have programs in the 4 counties in central Iowa.
Awesome. Thank you, Anna. And next we have Devana.
Hi, I'm Devona Case with Mentoring with Heart. I work for Glenwood Community Schools here in Glenwood, Iowa.
Thank you, Devana. And next we have Ellen.
Hi, Ellen Krogman with Helping Services for Youth and Families. I'm a mentoring coordinator in Delaware County.
Perfect. And then last and certainly not least, we have Jamie.
Hi, I'm Jamie Miller-West. I'm the mentoring coordinator for New Opportunities. We serve 5 counties.
Awesome. Well, we're happy to have everybody with us today. So we will be going over the supplemental material for the elements of effective practice. We'll start with LGBTQ, which Nicole will go into for us. And then next I'll talk about boys and young men of color. And Mary was going to discuss STEM, but since she's not here, we just have a link for it in the slides that will at least pause for a few minutes if you guys want to take down. And then of course we have moments for Q&A, and then we always like to end by letting you all know about some upcoming trainings and then the next peer share call. So without further ado, we'll just jump right into it.
Okay, thanks, Russell. So we wanted everyone to be aware of these amazing resources that are on the Mentor website. There's links to all 3 of these supplements that have been developed to be an extra resource that goes right along with the elements of effective practice of mentoring, 4th edition. So you can download all of the full supplements directly from the website. So that's where you're going to find them. I'm going to talk about the LGBTQ supplement to the EEP. This project was funded by the Altria Group through a grant, and it was researched and authored by a partnership, Big Brothers Big Sisters National and Mentor. There were Big Brothers Big Sisters of America affiliates have participated in piloting of the LGBTQ Mentoring Enhancements Project since 2016 with over 20 affiliate programs across the country. So they had chapters in Washington, Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky, North Carolina, California, Texas, Florida, Colorado, Nebraska, Indiana, Arizona, and more, putting these policies and practices into place, which is amazing for us because now we have actual examples that are included in the supplement that we can look at for how these chapters have used the supplement to enhance their programs. So we will look at some examples, and there's also included in the supplement, there are examples of changes in policies, procedures, trainings, and communications. So it was a working group of practitioners, researchers, and advocates that worked to put the pilot programs together and develop this supplement, and all of their information about who worked on this project is included in the supplement, so you can look at that if you're interested in that as well. I am going to read from the introduction I think it's important because it explains why this supplement was developed and then how they went about developing it. So this supplement responds to a long-standing call to extend the reach and quality of mentoring relationships to one of our nation's most underserved, marginalized, and vulnerable populations, youth who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning. So in part of the guide, they will go back and forth between LGBTQ and then also LGBTQQ. And the second Q is to, in reference for youth, especially that are in the stages of kind of questioning some of their sexual identity. So back to the introduction. As a well-documented body of research has noted, large numbers of LGBTQ youth are growing up at a deficit, facing difficult odds due to day-to-day experiences with societal stigma, victimization, bias, and rejection. Given such a landscape, there is need for caring adults, advocates, and mentors now more than ever. Unfortunately, only a small number of formal mentoring programs across the country are currently providing mission-driven services that speak directly to the unique needs and safety concerns of this population. Importantly, a growing body of research and practitioner-piloted practices also caution that mentoring services for LGBTQ youth may receive additional levels of awareness, program capacity, and advocacy. Such findings indicate that a business-as-usual approach to recruitment, screening, training, matching, case management, and evaluation may expose LGBTQ youth to additional risks and the potential for long-term harm at a time when these young people are most in need of care, advocacy, and having someone in their corner. As a response to these concerns and as a part of a shared commitment by Big Brothers Big Sisters of America and Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership, to improve mentoring services to all children and youth across the country, the LGBTQ supplement to the Elements of Effective Practice for Mentoring offers step-by-step operations guidance to develop safer, more affirming, and responsive mentoring relationships for LGBTQ youth. So after the introduction, there is a very helpful glossary of acronyms, terms, and definitions that they used. The definitions were adapted with permission from the Human Rights Campaign and the training materials offered through their All Children, All Families project. So I found the glossary very helpful as a place to start with learning all of the language and terms. Okay, so experiences of LGBTQ youth. An estimated 3.2 million youth, approximately 7% of all 8 to 18-year-olds in the United States are LGBTQ. So that means whether we know it or acknowledge it or not, mentoring programs are serving this population. So as the introduction spoke to, that's why it's so important that we make sure our policies are in line with these best practices and recommendations. So although many of these youth have access to positive support systems and families that do love and accept them, research shows that more than half experience one or more factors that place them at risk of not developing into healthy adults. So those risk factors include stigma and bias, victimization and bullying, parent and family rejection, homelessness, child welfare systems, juvenile justice involvement, depression, suicide, and risk-taking behaviors, and increased risk for transgender youth. So stigma and bias. Youth are often exposed to messaging that marginalizes and stigmatizes them. Victimization and bullying. There's some statistics from the website Safe Schools and the Safe Schools Academy. It's an excellent website that has lots of training and professional development opportunities. And some of the statistics that they share are that 6 in 10 LGBTQ students report feeling unsafe at school because of their sexual orientation, and that 92% of LGBTQ youth say that they are hearing negative messages about being LGBTQ, the top sources including the school, the internet, and peers. Parent and family rejection. Acceptance is an important factor for youth well-being. 2/3 have heard family members make negative comments. LGBTQ youth who experience family rejection are 8.4 times more likely to report a suicide attempt and 5.9 times more likely to describe high levels of depression. Homelessness, LGBTQ youth and young adults have a 120% higher risk of reporting homelessness compared to youth who identified as heterosexual or cisgender. There's a higher level in the child welfare systems and the juvenile justice involvement, which sometimes the systems are not all up to speed with the best practices of working with this population. And then according to a study by the Center for Disease Control, more than 40% of lesbian, gay, and bisexual students considered suicide. And there's also increased risk for transgender youth. So all of these statistics show us why it's so important that we can serve them through mentoring. Okay, so these are the ethical principles from the Elements of Effective Practice for Mentoring, the 4th edition. The authors of the supplement note that when programs are starting to align their program with these recommendations from this supplement, that usually starting with an assessment of your current readiness is a great place to start. And then they also note that some challenges can come up when you're doing that. So they advise some programs may face difficult decisions after conducting an assessment of their work with the LGBTQ community. This process may bring to light differences between the organization's values and level of commitment in this area and the opinions of funders, board members, or even staff members who feel differently about LGBTQ youth or the LGBTQ community more generally. We strongly encourage programs to make choices that support their commitment to serving the LGBTQ community, even if it means parting ways with longtime stakeholders, staff, or supporters. The ethical principles included in the Elements of Effective Practice for Mentoring are there to guide you through tough decisions when values seem to be in conflict. Programs are encouraged to avoid working with individuals or institutions who may create a less safe or even harmful environments and experiences for LGBTQ youth and LGBTQ mentors. There is no place in this work for individuals who do not respect rights and dignity for all, and who, through their beliefs, words, and actions, cannot promote the welfare of or justice for LGBTQ youth. So that was a note from the authors acknowledging what challenges might arise and giving their recommendations. And always going back to those ethical principles. Okay, so this supplement and guide should be used in addition to all of the standards and benchmarks that are in the EEP. So authors recommend having a copy of the full EEP on hand while you're reviewing this guide so that you can refer back to the EEP and see how it all fits together. So we're going to go over just a few examples of recommendations that are included. The guide is divided into 3 major sections. So there's program development and management, and then the 6 core standards of recruiting, screening, training, matching, and initiation, monitoring and support, and closure. And then program evaluation is the 3rd category. So if we first look at program design and management, you can see here a couple, and like I said, we are just pulling a couple examples because there's, let's see, I think the full guide is 78 pages, so there's lots of recommendations. So here's an example in the program design and management category. The program commits to intentionally providing inclusive, affirming, and safe mentoring services to LGBTQ youth and LGBTQ mentors. Program policies and procedures provide guidance on how program staff and mentors will talk with parents, guardians about a mentee's sexuality and how they will respond to youth who come out or transition during their time in the program. In the guide, there is a specific example from big brothers, big sisters of Puget Sound and their confidentiality policy. So I think it's very helpful to see an actual example when you're trying to think what would that look like and what needs to be included. So that is a great resource. And then the program intentionally provides LGBTQ youth and, if appropriate, LGBTQ mentors with an opportunity to have a voice in programming and provide feedback on feelings of safety and inclusion in the program. So again, involving the stakeholders. Okay, here are some examples from recruitment. So B 1.7 should look familiar from the full EEP. The program recruits mentees whose needs best match the services offered by the program. So the LGBTQ recommendation is that the program uses inclusive and welcoming language for mentees on their website, in recruitment brochures, and in other marketing materials. So they do talk about in the guide that this should be, not one of the first steps, but that first the work of bringing everyone on board and looking at all of your policies and procedures to make sure that you are being inclusive. And then obviously your outward messages would want to align with that, but just doing this, just updating your website is not enough, that you need to not, be walking the talk as well. Another enhancement is that the program uses defined outreach strategies to LGBTQ youth serving organizations to recruit mentees. So that is an example from recruitment. And then we have one from screening. So already in the full EEP for the benchmark 2.3 is the program conducts at least one face-to-face interview with each prospective mentor that includes questions designed to help the program assess his or her suitability for mentoring a youth. So then the extra recommendation for LGBTQ is that the program interview contains questions or scenario examples intended to assess compatibility in working with LGBTQ youth, or to surface homophobic, biphobic, or transphobic beliefs. So the authors note that many youth who are not out would be harmed by working with a mentor who openly or otherwise was critical of LGBTQ populations. Similarly, it might be harmful for these mentors to interact with other matches at group events or program-wide celebrations. So screening adults with these beliefs out of the program is likely a safer option than hoping these attitudes and beliefs do not become an issue. Research in related fields, such as education, have cited just how prevalent negative views of LGBTQ youth can be among adults and the harm they can do in their institutions. One study found that 56% of students reported hearing homophobic remarks from teachers and other school staff in the last year. This illustrates that even environments that are supposed to be supportive of young people can become incredibly harmful for some youth when homophobia is allowed to go unchecked. Mentoring programs are encouraged to prevent adults who might cause similar damage from progressing to the matching stage. So some examples of questions that could be added into the interview to kind of surface some of these issues. One, what would they say if their mentee used homophobic language during a conversation? Two, what might they say to their mentee if they found out that they were physically assaulted at school because of their sexual orientation or gender identity expression? And three, how would they feel about working with same-sex parents or guardians of their mentee? So those are examples of questions that could be added into that, the already screening questions that you have in your program. So at this time, are there any questions or thoughts about some of these recommendations and how programs can go about implementing them? Has any programs taken a look at this specific population or had discussions as a staff or with their board? Anyone have any experiences they want to share? Okay, doesn't sound like we have any thoughts to add at this time. So our purpose today was to let programs know that this supplement is available and it's free. You can download it right from Mentor's website, and we definitely encourage you to take advantage. It's an excellent resource. So we will transition from covering the first supplement to a guide to mentoring boys and young men of color.
Yes, thank you very much, Nicole. Before I start, I just want to quickly apologize to Abby. I'm pretty sure I skipped over her in the beginning when it came to introductions, so I'm sorry about that. We also had 2 new individuals join the training, so I'll allow Abby and the rest to introduce themselves. So Abby, since I skipped over you, and I apologize for that, do you want to introduce yourself to the group?
Sure. My name's Abby Lathrop. I'm the Chief Program Officer for Big Brothers Big Sisters of the Midlands in Omaha, Nebraska. And we serve 2 counties in Iowa, Mills and Potawatomi.
Awesome. Thank you, Abby. And again, sorry about that.
That's okay. No problem.
We also had Angie join us. Angie, do you want to introduce yourself either via phone or via chat?
Yes, my name is Angie Woodford, and I'm the program coordinator for STARS mentoring program, which is a school-based mentoring program with the Storm Lake Community School District.
Awesome. Always glad to have you, Angie. And our last individual to join us was Deborah. Do you want to say hello to the group?
Hello, I'm Deborah Stevenson, and I'm with the Davenport Community Schools. I run our STARS, and that STARS with 2 A's. I just heard a 1 A in there from the previous person. So we're STARS with 2 A's, Students Teaming with Advocates for Academics, Relationships, and Success. And it is a school-based mentoring program that also branches out into numerous different site-based mentoring endeavors.
Awesome. Thank you, Deborah. And from the looks of it, I have not left anybody out this time around, so we should be good to go. Just like Nicole said, we're going to talk about the Guide to Mentoring Boys and Young Men of Color. You'll see that both on the slide, and when I continue on from presenting on this, I'll be using the acronym BYMOC, which is short for Boys and Young Men of Color. It's just easier to shorten it instead of having to say that whole thing. So the Guide to Mentoring Boys and Young Men of Color was a collaboration between Mentor and My Brother's Keeper Alliance, along with practitioners in the field and researchers specializing in mentorship of youth of color. That better serve this population with a targeted set of practices which represent enhancements of those in the original elements, similar to the LGBTQ supplement that Nicole just spoke on. So I will kind of sort of just jump right into it. Here we go. So in the beginning of the guide, you'll see the introduction section, the part 1, which is the overview, kind of go over these sort of main things. So just start off with, like, why should we emphasize mentoring for boys and young men of color versus just people of color in general? And it starts off with a wonderful quote from former President Barack Obama in 2014, whenever he actually launched the My Brother's Keeper initiative, which says, "Data shows that boys and young men of color, regardless of socioeconomic background, are disproportionately at risk throughout the journey from their youngest years to college and career. For instance, large disparities remain in reading proficiency, with 86% of Black boys and 82% of Hispanic boys reading below proficiency levels by the 4th grade, compared to 58% of white boys reading below proficiency levels. Additionally, the disproportionate number of Black and Hispanic young men who are unemployed or involved in the criminal justice system alone is a perilous drag on state budgets and undermines family and community stability. These young men are more than 6 times as likely to be victims of murder than their white peers and account for almost half of the country's murder victims each year. So that quote alone from the former president is supposed to, encapsulate the idea of why we have this guide specifically for BYMOC. But with that also, there's this idea that systematic disadvantages show up fairly early for boys and young men of color, especially when there are zero tolerance policies in schools and hyper-vigilant and unbending policing practices that usually disproportionately impact BYMOCs unequally. And we also just kind of want to emphasize here that many youth in communities of color do have access to caring adults and mentors, so that shouldn't be forgotten. But the data does suggest that this demographic does disproportionately become disconnected from more caring non-parental units than other demographics, which is sort of supposed to highlight the reason why there is a specific guide for this population, because it does affect them more than most other populations in the rest of the United States. And then it talks about, predominantly in the introduction, about a strength-based approach and the positive impacts of using it. And sort of kind of answer with that is, it's sort of within the name. Oftentimes the challenges facing this demographic is very well documented, but far less attention has been given to the strengths of these individuals along with their communities. So a strengths-based approach to mentoring positively impacts a significant proportion of boys and young men of color whose life context and societal perceptions and experiences may be quite different than other youth in the country. So through strong relationships with mentors, the impact of the challenges boys and young men of color face can be mitigated, and their strengths and the strengths of their communities, families, and cultures can be drawn on to bolster their potential for success. And like schools and other youth-serving initiatives, mentoring programs find success through delivering culturally relevant services, developing the strengths of those they serve, and building on the assets of the local community. So the whole point of this approach is to more so identify and respect the strengths of the mentees who you're trying to serve in this instance, as well as their communities and social networks. And by doing so, it can go a long way towards supporting the mentoring relationship, as well as their own personal identity with their ethnic culture, their culture of origin, because there's been a systematic sort of impression, whether explicit or implicit, which sometimes devalues either their identity or their culture. So that's the point of this approach. That also then goes into what critical mentoring is. Both myself and Nicole had the pleasure to hear a presentation on this not too long ago in Omaha during their Mentor Midlands award ceremony, and it was very eye-opening. So the idea of critical mentoring focuses on this idea of critical consciousness, and I have that italicized and underlined because I will go into more details to what that is in the next slide. But at the core of critical mentoring is this idea of critical consciousness. So the whole point of critical mentoring is you need to begin with a very deep understanding of the context of what the youth is living in, which can mean anything from their environment to their relationships. And the whole point of that is that it then allows the mentoring relationship to focus on providing that mentee with opportunities to reflect, discuss, and also challenge systems of inequity that they may be experiencing or witnessing, which would not be too hard to identify for boys and young men of color. So to kind of get into the rest of what critical mentoring is, I have to go over a few key concepts. The first one being critical consciousness. What is critical consciousness? Critical consciousness is the ability to perceive and understand social, political, and economic oppression, and to be able to deal with such issues and to be ready to take action against oppressive elements of society. So critical consciousness requires a very deep sort of understanding from not just the mentor, but also the mentoring program to kind of understand the place of the mentee's own identity as well as the mentor's identity within the rest of society and societal context. Give me just 1 minute here. Yes, so this awareness will help to build a mentor's critical consciousness as well as their ability to help the mentee become quickly aware, as well as to perceive social and political oppression. Where need to be? Oh, yes. So the rationale for this is that in order for mentors to work effectively with the mentee, you have to gain this awareness as to your own personal social identities, which can range from anything from race to class, sexual orientation, ethnicity, and other aspects of identity, which can impact the mentor and mentee relationship. So this self-knowledge greatly enhances mentors' abilities to talk to boys and young men about their challenges, and the exploration of self that is involved in this type of training and just reflection requires that a foundation of trust is first built among trainees and training staff. So a lot of these concepts I'm about to go into, aside from critical consciousness, you will hear me bring back up later on, because the bulk of the recommendations for the elements of effective practice come in regards to training. That's where a lot of these concepts will really be integrated into your program, and for your mentors is in the training process. So I will touch on this a little more in just a few more slides. The next concept is cultural competency, which almost kind of goes along with as it sounds. Cultural competency is just the ability to understand, appreciate, and interact effectively with people of different cultures, socioeconomic backgrounds, and or belief systems other than your own. And on the other flip side of that is cultural humility, which is just the idea that we are always constantly learning about how we can better be aware of cultures and how we can interact with cultures. So you will never be 100% culturally competent. There will always be a way to push that understanding further. So whenever these trainings occur, you'll oftentimes see those two vocab terms sort of sometimes interchangeably used, but cultural humility is oftentimes more highlighted because it gives better grounds for learning for the mentor in the programs as for cultural competency, because sometimes that can give way to the idea that you can be 100% learned on these things, which is just not true. The other thing is implicit bias. This is a very big thing because implicit bias doesn't just play within individuals, it also plays within systems and structures that we live in society. So implicit bias can be those attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. So usually these things are activated involuntarily and most often without the individual's awareness or intentional control. We can always easily spot explicit bias or explicit racism, but implicit is more insidious and harder to identify. So I believe it's Harvard University has a very interesting sort of test program you can find online, which tests your own implicit bias, and I'd welcome all of you to look for it on the internet because it can open you up to even reflect more on yourself, because I'm sure each one of us can say none of us here are racist or look at other races in a demeaning or degrading way. But the other thing is that we do live in a society which still has a lot of structures and systems in place which are implicitly racist. And since we do grow up and interact in these structures, they do influence us whether we like it or not. And so we have to be critically conscious of that and reflect on our own implicit biases, even as well-intentioned as we are, which is why this is a huge thing that is often discussed within the guide and just in general within this field of research. The next things aren't anything that are unique to interacting with boys and young men of color, but they come up often in this discussion, and that is identity and empowerment. So I don't really give too much of a definition for identity as more so an example within this context. So the example was that racial identity reflects how one has internalized their socialization experiences surrounding that race. And that could be an easy idea of whenever a boy or young man of color sees how their identity is oftentimes portrayed in the media, it's not always exactly in the most positive light. And so that will unfortunately inform their knowledge of their own identity. And so that's one way that you'll hear that concept be mentioned within, especially the training aspect. And so we just want to make sure that you are well aware about how that can sort of influence both the training and one's own personal understanding. And empowerment, I would say, is probably even more important because This leads, especially in the training aspect, to veer programs and also individual mentors away from the idea of being a quote-unquote savior, because we don't want to think of this idea that we are saving children, but rather than just highlighting their strengths and making sure we give them the best platform for success. So in this case, we want to, especially with boys and young men of color, want to empower them, which in this case would mean assisting them to self-advocate and equip them with the tools to understand their existing social capital and to navigate potential barriers to success. Empowerment isn't anything unique to just boys and young men of color. This is cross-applicable to all youth, but something we want to really highlight with boys and young men of color, since they are oftentimes not empowered. They're oftentimes discouraged in many ways. So that's why that vocab word was kind of thrown in there. And there is so much literature within this guide that I could spend hours on this alone. But since I need to kind of condense it to about a 20-25-minute interval, I'm just going to now jump right into some of the recommendations that it gives for the elements of effective practice. So I'll start first with recruitment. So in the first benchmark of recruitment, it reads that programs engage in recruitment strategies that realistically portray the benefits, practices, supports, and challenges of mentoring in the program. And RP just means recommended
practice.
Yeah, recommended practice. So this is what the guide suggests you add to this benchmark, that being you should target a broad range of mentor characteristics and qualities to meet the diverse needs of boys and young men of color. So whenever you're trying to recruit, you have to really try to be mindful of what you're trying to recruit for. And this even goes into more detail, I think, when it comes to matching, which I also include later, in that you can't just be looking for just men of color to match with young boys of color. You need to be looking for more important characteristics, which will actually, in the end, be more important for the development of that mentoring relationship, such as what are their skills, what are their life experiences, what's their attitudes, their beliefs, what are their core values, because those things have more of a greater implication on the mentoring relationship than just their ethnic identity. But we also want to put a bit of a caveat on that, in that there are mentoring programs whose model is to purposefully match people of color with another person of color to mentor them. And we're not trying to discourage that. What we're trying to say is that you need to be looking for far more than just that, because when you don't, that can lead to matching someone who is very ill-equipped to actually be a positive male model for a boy or young man of color. The next thing is benchmark 1.5, which says that program trains and encourages mentees to identify and recruit appropriate mentors for themselves when relevant. I'm just now realizing I messed this up a little bit off. So when reading the guide, the recommended practices will have what looks like their corresponding benchmarks, which sometimes they do, sometimes not quite, which is, I think, my error in this instance here. So I'm sorry for the misleading benchmark and recommended practice here. But the recommended practice still kind of draw your attention to, because that is very important to make sure that your recruitment materials for families and youth are welcoming, you're clear about the program goals, expectations, and they're also culturally relevant and attuned, because that can really sort of set the dialogue and discussion for whenever a family is trying to find a mentoring program. And in the same way I mentioned this earlier, it can help avoid the savior complex, which is not at all helpful. So whenever you have these recruitment efforts, use messages that support a strengths-based approach at all times. So at times, mentors may receive messages that support or propagate the idea that they're charged with saving a child through their efforts alone, but we all know that it takes far more than one person to assist boys and young men on their journeys throughout life. And so in keeping with that strength-based approach idea, messaging should more so emphasize that a key part of a mentor's mission is to assist youth to identify and grow their own social networks. Because when you identify other adults who may be a part of that youth social network, it strengthens their own potential support within their community and with those relationships. And that's what we want to highlight. We don't want the mentor to be a substitute. We want them to be a supplement for their strong networks of adults and for their community, which is what you can sort of allude to in your recruitment materials. Now, the bulk of what the recommendations come out of is training, because as you could probably guess, out of all those concepts I just threw at you, it requires deep understanding and self-reflection. And even then, there's also a recommendation in the monitoring and support section, which recommends you have ongoing trainings on the subject. You can't just do a one and done training and think that you can have your mentors be culturally competent and really have a deep critical consciousness of their identities. It's going to take a while. Because once again, with the idea of cultural humility, we're always learning. And so keep that in mind with the training, that there is also that caveat within the monitoring and support standard that there be ongoing trainings on this as well. So for benchmark 3.2, program provides pre-match trainings for mentors on, oh no, go back, on the following topics. I didn't list all of them because if you remember reading the EEP, there's a ton. I just listed a few there. But the recommended practice was that you include a focus on the concepts of critical consciousness, cultural competency, and humility, and that you try to then begin the development of an understanding of how the culture of a broad society impacts the mentee's own environment, and include a focus on improving mentors' understanding of the challenges and opportunities of that environment. And in a way, that's just sort of a deeper expansion on something already what you should be doing in your trainings, and that is having your mentors be able to identify the opportunities and challenges that their mentee is facing. So this is just more so a expansion on that, especially when it comes to boys and young men of color. And then below is another recommended practice that I did not actually find a matching benchmark with. It's an additional benchmark that whenever you do these trainings, try to find community resources to fill the gaps in those resources, because it is okay that if your program feels ill-equipped to train on these things. And in fact, it actually really helps if you can find those community resources. Because if we're trying to go with a strength-based approach and build on these networks, it's a sort of practice what you preach sort of idea. So if you want to build on the strengths and the relationships that the youth already has, then you should also build on the relationships within the community. And I can promise you that there will be at least one community resource in your area that has some literature or experience in training on these topics. And so in the areas that you feel like you can't with full faith talk on this, that's okay. You can always just reach out to someone in the community, which is, if anything, is going to be better for your program, and also sort of display to the mentees and mentors what they should be striving for when it comes to creating these networks. I could spend a lot of time on this, but I'll just kind of skip to the last kind of bit. And once again, just like in the LGBTQ supplement, there's a whole wealth of recommendations that Nicole and I are just trying to give you a few examples of. So one example with the matching and initiating, the recommended practice was to avoid matching based exclusively upon racial and ethnic background, which I talked about earlier. Unless, like I said, this is critical to your mentoring model, we just ask that once again you do try to be very intentional with how you are matching youth, especially boys, young men of color, just like any other youth. Whenever you try to match them, you try to think of common interests they may have. You may try to think of what the mentor could possibly teach the mentee. Say if the mentor is very social and outgoing and the mentee might be more reserved and shy, there's an obvious area of growth for the youth there that maybe the mentor can pass down some social ideas, some social cues that can help them grow and be more social. So same thing applies with boys and young men of color. It's just sort of there to remind you that you can't just exclusively match someone based off of their race, because that is dangerous and in itself is just a silly practice. Going to monitoring and support, one thing that is really important as well is to suggest activities that allow mentors and mentees to explore culture, heritage, history, and the background of their communities. So they can try to go out into the community to find areas where they can sort of engage those cultural practices that may not as always be celebrated. Giving that youth a stronger and more positive self-identifying thing to their own culture, to their own community. Since oftentimes youth and even communities of color aren't always painted in the best of light, going and doing these community activities and these cultural activities can help mitigate and fight against that stereotype, help against that stigma, because we want the youth to feel strong and positive about their own identities. So again, Mary's not here, unfortunately. This was going to be her portion of the peer share call. So all these resources, including the STEM mentoring guide, are for free that you can download from Mentor's website. This is what it looks like, at least the cover, and that is the link. And once again, we will put these trainings on our YouTube channel and then put it on our trainings tab on our website. So if you want to copy that down by your hand and plug it in, you can, but you can just go on the Mentor website and find it yourself.
We also have, if there's any programs that need the elements of effective practice for mentoring, the 4th edition, like in the actual book form, we can get those for you. So let one of the 3 of us know if your program could use a copy or multiple copies of that.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. So this can be the portion where we can answer any questions you may have, whether it's about the LGBTQ youth or a few other things. I currently see that Deborah has her hand raised. Do you have a question, Deborah?
I did have a question. It was regarding the first slide when you talked about President Obama's quote. And actually, I just missed one little piece of information, and that was when you talked about reading proficiency. You said that Black boys were 86%. And what was the number for Hispanic boys?
82%.
82%.
Yes.
So
And
those
also,
numbers gone up?
I'm unsure. The quote itself is from 2014, so it's possible those numbers have changed. I was just quoting what was said in that he had in his fact sheet in 2014. So I'm sure those numbers have changed, but I don't have those numbers in front of me right now.
And was that proficiency or non-proficient?
That was proficiency. Let me read. So 86% of Black boys and 82% of Hispanic boys reading below proficiency levels by the 4th grade. Yes, which compared to only 58% of white boys reading below proficiency levels.
Okay, thank
Yes.
you. And
No
I
problem.
do need a couple more copies of the Elements of Effective Practice, the 4th edition.
Great. We'll get those ordered, Deborah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did anyone else have any questions regarding the LGBTQ supplement or the Boys and Young Men of Color supplement?
I do have one more question, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
I missed the first part of that, and I apologize for that. It's my first time doing a conference call by this method, and I couldn't figure out where anything was. But anyway, is there a way to download those slides other than the screenshots, which I've been doing throughout the last part of your presentation?
We can send them out, right?
Yeah, we can send them out.
Registered.
So once we're done and we download the training itself, we can go back and look at the attendance list and just email to every participant our share of the slides. So that way you can go through, look at the information, and even just click on the links to the guides themselves. So yeah, we will most certainly send out the PowerPoint slides to all of you.
Wonderful. And then my last question, I promise. When you talked about making matches, and you had said that to make a same ethnicity match was kind of a silly practice. I can remember back when I first started this program in 2005, I think it was. I partnered with Big Brothers Big Sisters of the Mississippi Valley, and that was one of the issues they had. They had a number of Black kids on their waiting list for their community-based program whose parents said that they only wanted them to have a Black mentor. And, considering all of the dynamics that's going on with Black youth, it obviously made sense to a whole lot of us. And so, when did that shift change?
So that was what I was trying to say. There wasn't that matching boys and young men of color with Black mentors itself was a silly practice. What the guide is saying is that when you exclusively make that your criteria for matching, that's the danger. And so there is a lot of value in matching boys and young men of color with male mentors of color, because that can help them feel more positive in their identity as being a boy of color. So and I sort of worded that in a bad way, so I apologize for the confusion. So that matching boys and young men of color with male mentors of color isn't a bad practice. What the guide is simply saying is that don't exclusively make that your criteria. There has to be more to it.
Also, you want to make sure that, if they're matched with the mentor, that, you're not just looking at the race, but then you're also looking at that mentor's skills and interests and personality and life experiences, so that it's that deeper screening look to make a match that's going to last.
Yeah, it was more of like a warning that these function just like every other mentoring relationship. So you want to make sure you have those other important characteristics going into your matching process, so that both your mentor and mentee can get the most out of the relationship. So I apologize for my wording there. It could have been far more careful.
Okay, well, thank you for that clarification, and I agree with you 200%. The only part that concerned me was it kind of sounded like it was, exclusively saying, do not make those matches, because I can tell you with the number of fatherless homes, I certainly can see sometimes where that particular criteria is crucial. But I agree with you. Cross matches have so much to offer. So thank you for that.
No, and thank you for your questions. I'm glad you brought that up, because I would have felt so bad if I had potentially confused the conversation on that. And once again, I myself am, I'm not a male of color, so I'm always learning more on these topics. So again, apologize for the confusion there, everybody. These matching on the ethnicity isn't a bad idea, and that was also mentioned in the guide that there are mentoring models that is their whole point, and that is perfectly okay.
Right.
It was just a warning that we have to look out for more things than just that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Did anyone else have any other questions? And thank you for your questions, Deborah.
Sure, thank you.
Open the chat. Okay, we don't have any other questions at this time. We wanted you to be aware of some upcoming trainings. So there's Volunteer Iowa is putting on an innovation exchange, building an inclusive and equitable environment. So one of those trainings, it's the same training, but just 2 different dates and locations. So the April 9th in Ames already occurred. And then April 24th is still upcoming in Cedar Rapids. And there are no costs for training to participants if you would like to attend. And then there's also a grant preparation and management training, 2 different dates and locations as well. So there is, one of those have already happened as well. But the upcoming one is May 15th in Cedar Falls from 9 to 4. So if you're interested in those, I'm not sure if those registrations were probably included in the last newsletter, but we can send out those links when we send out the slides as well.
Yes, and I'm pretty sure at least one of them was included, but I can't say if both were, but
okay.
we'll definitely, we'll get those out to you guys. And of course, the last thing, our next peer share call will be on May 9th from the same time, 2-3 p.m. And we're very happy to say that we will be having Lisa Schneider and Emily Thomas from the Iowa Department of Human Rights come to give a presentation on disability inclusion, which is another great thing that we want to keep mindful for our mentoring programs, that this is a demographic we need to be looking out for because they too need to be mentored. But sometimes they require a little bit more trainings for your mentors and some more preparation for your programs to do as well. So they're going to be discussing some things your programs may need to keep in mind if you're trying to include more youth or even mentors who may have disabilities. So put that in your calendars. We're looking forward to having them come and present. And I think that's that. That's all we have for you guys.
We're right on time.
We're right on time. Look at that.
Thank you all for participating today.
Yes. Thank you guys very much. It's always glad to have you guys here, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.